Welcome to Murder with the Missus. I'm Darren.
And I'm Amy. And today we're going to tell you about Chris Benoit with our special guest, Haley.
Don't forget to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Podbean, and Facebook. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you get the new episodes whenever they drop. And tell your friends as always.
This is a fairly older case that many may already know, but some of you youngsters may not. And Mr. Darren wanted to cover it, so here we are. It's also a cautionary tale because when you think of chronic traumatic encephalopathy,
What?
Encephalopathy.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Okay.
Encephalopithecus?
Encephalopathy.
I know, in my head I say it fine. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. You probably think of football players like Aaron Hernandez. But if you have ever in your life watched pro wrestling, especially back in the day, you would see that the threat of CTE doesn't stop at football or boxing. According to Maxim, a study done in 2007 said wrestlers are 12 times more likely to die from heart disease. And another said that they are 20 times more likely to die before the age of 45 than NFL players. We watched wrestling in our houses growing up and on into early adulthood. The theatrics, the costumes, the oiled up muscles, the ladies, and the drama. Now, Chris was around 5'11" tall and just over 220 pounds, and he was originally from Canada. He also loved wrestling as a kid, especially Bret Hart and Tom Dynamite Kid Billington, since he was about 12 years old. He trained in the Hart family dungeon until he started his wrestling career in 1985. At this point, he was around 21 or 22 years old. He paid tribute to Tom Billington and wrestled as Dynamite Chris Benoit. He tried some moves, including what is called the diving headbutt, which is pretty self-explanatory. You get your opponent writhing in pain on the mat, then you climb up on the top turnbuckle and jump off, landing on the other guy head first. Sometimes Chris would just fall off the turnbuckle, not jump. Either way, same result.
And nobody wins with a headbutt.
It's a lose-lose as far as I'm concerned.
Right?
But when Chris tried it for the first time, he did it wrong and knocked the wind out of himself. He said he would never do it again. But it became one of his regular moves. As you can guess, this move is super dangerous. He went from Canada to Japan under the new stage name, the Pegasus Kid. I love that. And eventually, the Wild Pegasus. He was briefly in the American WCW, or World Championship Wrestling, then Australia, Mexico, and back to Japan. He was in the ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, when he was performing as the Crippler.
Yeah, so he traveled a lot.
A man of many names.
Yes,
might I
you got to
add.
change your whole persona, when you do something different.
Mm-hmm.
In a match with another wrestler, Sabu, things went wrong. They have this thing called a pancake bump, where you basically starfish and land flat, usually face down. It doesn't really hurt too bad if you do it right, but it does look like it hurts to the crowd. The two are face to face, and Chris puts his arm between Sabu's legs and hoists him up, then ducks as Sabu flies through the air behind him. But instead of flattening his body out to land on the mat, Sabu tried to rotate. He ends up landing on the top of his head, breaking his neck. He immediately rolled off stage and was able to get help. Don't stop the show or anything. And this is obviously horrendous for Sabu, but Chris was devastated too. He thought he had paralyzed this man. He broke down crying in the dressing room after.
Sabu not only recovered, he kept wrestling afterwards. Chris did too.
Yeah,
Well,
they're
yeah,
not
of
going to
course
stop.
Chris did.
Of course Chris did. Yeah. He wrestled with the WCW and WWF. I remember seeing him with a tooth missing and completely profiled him. I'll admit it. Being from Canada, I assumed it had to do with hockey. Some thought it was related to training for wrestling, but it wasn't either. So, I had to look it up. It was actually his Rottweiler. He was playing with his dog, and the dog came up, and his hard head hit Chris's chin so hard that it knocked his tooth out. So we were all wrong. But speaking of his personal life, he had been married to his wife, Martina, since 1988, and they had 2 kids, David and Megan. In the wrestling world, they had a storyline that would spill over into his personal life. Another wrestler, Kevin Sullivan, and his real-life wife, Nancy, worked together. She was going by the stage name Woman and was on the show as her husband's valet.
Woman.
That was literally it. Just it. Woman.
Woman. Everybody was like, whoa!
I love Woman.
Whereas like, get over here, woman.
Oh, no. Kevin and Chris were feuding, and to keep on the ruse, Chris and Nancy spent a lot of time together in public, holding hands, getting hotel rooms, whatever it took to make people in the public believe they were really having an affair. Until they were really having an affair. They both divorced their spouses and married each other. The WWF turned into the WWE, and Nancy and Chris had a son named Daniel in February of 2000. In 2003, Nancy filed for divorce from Chris and threw in a restraining order for good measure. She said Chris broke stuff and threw furniture around, but she did later drop both cases and they stayed together.
Chris became good friends with wrestler Eddie Guerrero when Chris knocked Eddie out during a match by kicking him in the head.
Yeah, so he kicked him in the head on accident, knocked him out. And then they're like, you want to be best friends?
Best friends for life.
That's what I was about to say. They actually became best friends.
They did. They were very good friends.
Yeah.
They got together with another friend of Chris's, Dean Malenko, and they traveled the circuit as the Three Amigos. Chris said he borrowed a move from Dean and turned it into his own finishing move, the Crippler Crossface. In November of 2005, Chavo, Eddie's nephew, and another WWE wrestler, found Eddie unconscious in a hotel room in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It would come out that he died of acute heart failure as a result of years of painkiller and steroid use. He was 38 years old. Many wrestlers use steroids, and since they work between 200 to 300 nights a year, depending on popularity among other things, many use painkillers to get by. They were pumped full of Vicodin, Somas, Percocet, whatever kept them moving. Vince McMahon, the co-founder of the WWE, had been charged in the early 90s with distributing steroids, but he was acquitted. Now, after Eddie's death, the WWE started the Talent Wellness Program to make wrestlers get stress tests, physicals, drug tests, the whole nine. They were not allowed to do drugs anymore, unless they could get a doctor to find a reason they would need certain drugs. If they had that, they wouldn't get penalized for popping hot. Even after this, even when they were told when they were going to be tested, 40% still failed for steroid use. Chris was one that had found a doctor to prescribe him the things that he needed to stay pain-free and muscled up.
As time went on, Chris became more paranoid. Sometimes he wouldn't let his family leave the house.
Yeah, they weren't even allowed to leave the house at some point.
Oh, goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, Daniel, and Nancy lived in Fayetteville, Georgia at this time. He would drive different routes to places like the airport because he was thinking someone was following him. It was getting pretty bad. On Thursday, June 21st, 2007, Nancy called a friend and said she was scared, that if anything happened to her, look at Chris. On Friday, Chris went to his doctor in Carrollton, Georgia. This was the doctor that had been prescribing him his drugs for years now, like a 10-month supply every 4 weeks, according to an affidavit in the federal indictment. This doctor was able to prescribe steroids to Chris because of his testicular insufficiency due to previous steroid use. Go figure. Literally.
We're going to give you steroids because of what steroids have done to your body.
Yep, it sounds like the perfect fix.
Mm-hmm.
The family had a cookout at their house that day. They later found a receipt in the house for over $4,000 in food and supplies bought that day. At around 6 p.m. that evening, a pool cleaner came to the house to work and said Chris and Daniel were outside grilling food. His buddy Chavo later said that he was on the phone with Chris that night for about 45 minutes when there was a knock on Chris's door. Chavo heard a scuffle, and then the line went dead. This was supposedly said in an article with WWE Magazine, but no one seems to be able to find any proof of this article anywhere. We'll talk about a possible reason why later.
Now on Saturday afternoon, Chris left a voicemail for Chavo. He missed his plane to meet up with him before that night's show in Texas. Chavo called back and said Chris's voice sounded forced. And when they got off the phone, Chris told Chavo that he loved him and then hung up. Now, it's not unusual for them to say that, but Chavo thought it sounded kind of deliberate or final, because instead of just love you, it was pointed, like Chavo, I love you. So Chavo called back to make sure everything was okay with his friend. Chris said he was just stressed out since Nancy and Daniel had food poisoning and were throwing up, but said that he would be at the show that night. After the call, Chris went outside and saw his neighbor.
They talked about Nancy and Daniel being sick. She said that the conversation was extremely odd.
Yeah, so just like Chavo had said, he was just off. Early Sunday morning at around 3:53 a.m., Chris started texting Chavo and one of the WWE referees, saying, "My address is," and then gives the full address, including the zip code. 2 minutes later, he sends, "The dogs are in the enclosed pool area. Garage side door is open." And then 3 messages in 3 minutes with the same information was sent to Chavo from Nancy's phone. Chavo woke up to the text chime, but he thought they were just old messages that had come through, like if you don't have a signal, but then you do, and it spam sends them all at once. So he went back to sleep without responding. He woke up later that morning and called Chris, but got no answer. WWE was calling him too because they had given him the last couple of days to be with his family because they were sick, but they had a pay-per-view event Sunday night that he could not miss.
Sunday morning, Chris had called WWE saying that the family was going to the hospital because Nancy was vomiting blood, but that he would make it for the event that night. He did not make it to the pay-per-view event, and the crowd had been chanting his name. Monday, June 25th, Chavo told WWE officials at 12:30 p.m. about the text he got from Chris and that he couldn't get a hold of him. WWE called the Fayette County Sheriff's Office to do a wellness check, and they got to the house around 2:30 p.m. Chris's 2 German Shepherds barked at the cops, so they were hesitant to go into the house when they got no answer at the door.
The neighbor, Holly, volunteered to go inside and put the dogs up since she knew them. She went inside and came out screaming.
43-year-old Nancy was found in the bonus room of the house. Her arms were bound with coax cable. Her feet were duct taped together. There was a tube sock duct taped into a ball with dried blood on it in the kitchen trash that is believed to have been used as a gag. I want to note here that when tested, it had Nancy's DNA on it, but not Chris's. She was wrapped in a blanket, and there was a Bible next to her. Toxicology came back showing she had alcohol, hydrocodone, Xanax, and hydromorphone in her system. Due to decomp, it was not determined that the levels in her system were consistent with what it would have been at the time of her death. But at autopsy, they were at therapeutic levels. The alcohol couldn't be determined as something that she had drank or as a product of decomp, but they do believe that it was such a small enough level that they strongly believe that it was just decomp, that she had not been drinking. But based on the condition of the body, it is believed that Chris put his knee into her back while pulling a cord around her neck to strangle her, and that she had been killed on Friday. It was noted that the room Nancy was found in was 82 degrees, so that could have contributed to the acceleration of the decomposition. 7-year-old Daniel was found in his bedroom. He had Xanax in his system. It was alleged that he had undiagnosed Fragile X syndrome and that they had been injecting him with HGH or human growth hormones because he was undersized. Police reports say that they did notice a needle mark on his arm, but Nancy's sister emphatically says that that is not true, that he did not have Fragile X syndrome and he did not have a needle mark on his arm. It is believed that Chris killed Daniel early Saturday. He also had a children's Bible propped up against his hand. It was rumored that he had bruising on his body indicating he had the crippler crossface move done on him, but that, thankfully, has been debunked. He did not. He did not have any bruising on his body to support that, and he didn't have any damage to his throat or bruising on the neck, so it is believed that he was drugged so that he would stay asleep and then smothered with a pillow. 40-year-old Chris was in the basement gym on the lat pull-down machine. The bar had been removed and a torn white towel was wrapped around his neck that was then taped together. The steel cord was wrapped around his neck over the cloth. The weight had been adjusted to allow for hanging, according to later reports. But 2 reports done at the time say that he was upright, not that he was hanging, just that he was upright. And it is believed that he died on Sunday. He had Xanax, hydrocodone, and 10 times of the normal level of testosterone steroids in his system.
roid rage was what most people believed is what happened, that Chris snapped.
Right, but a 3-day rager? I don't know. The police photos show a relatively tidy house. Not what you'd expect if someone was on a rampage. No broken stuff. He would have had to clean up a mess before hurting himself if that was the case. Not completely out of the question, but not a typical scenario. They noted in the reports that there were beer cans in the trash can, and the crime scene photos show that there was an empty wine bottle on the floor. And after autopsy, they know that neither adult really had alcohol in their system, so these were likely still there from the Friday cookout. Some take issue with the fact that none of these were tested for DNA. The talent at WWE on Monday were getting ready for Monday Night Raw, which is a live show. At around 4:15 p.m., the police notified WWE officials that the bodies of all 3 members of the family had been found deceased. No details were given. Ironically, the show was planned to be the death of Vince McMahon's character who had been in a car explosion on a previous show. They instead turned it into a 3-hour tribute to Chris.
Not the tribute, okay. They later obviously found out what had really happened, that Chris had killed Nancy, then Daniel the next day, and then himself the day after that. The WWE worked their hardest to remove Chris from WWE history. Merchandise was pulled, they didn't mention him on the website or in publications. They pulled most of the matches that he was in from DVDs and logs so they couldn't be re-aired. That one made some of the other wrestlers a little mad because if they were his opponents, they would be removed from history too. But WWE did not want to be associated with this tragedy. They left some that were like brawls, multiple people involved, where he would be in the background, and cropped him out of whatever footage they could. They took him and his moves out of their video games. Smart. They put parental advisories before any programs that Chris couldn't be completely removed from. The band, Our Lady Peace, who wrote Chris's theme song, said in a 2012 interview that they couldn't ever perform the song again. This is what I alluded to as to why the article for WWE Magazine that Chavo did may not be available. Maybe it was pulled before it could be published.
Reports say that a week after the tragedy, a fan held up a sign that said, "Why?" And WWE officials took that too.
Yeah, they wouldn't even allow signs that alluded to anything that happened.
Yeah.
3 days after the bodies were found, Chris's dad, Michael, got a call from Chris Nowinski. He was a former college football player and pro wrestler. He wanted Chris's brain. Nowinski had devoted his life to researching concussions. So Chris's brain was sent to the Sports Legacy Institute, and they found that Chris's brain was that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer patient. It was filled with brown, dead brain cells. This type of damage causes increased confusion, aggression, loss of appetite control, and delusions. This is believed to be the result of repeated head trauma, like what you would get from a career of flying headbutts. Sadly, they say that this type of damage can't be identified while the person is still alive.
Oh, wow.
The flying headbutt was banned for about a minute following the tragedy, but reports are that it is still allowed now.
Right. Some of Chris's items were sent to his ex-wife and other 2 children, including a Bible. And while a suicide note was not found at the scene, there was reported to be one in the Bible, saying that he was preparing to leave the earth. Now, his son said that that is not true. And speaking of David, he did talk about becoming a wrestler himself, but that didn't happen. So they were actually talking about him and Chavo Jr. wrestling.
Oh, wow.
Yes. But a lot of people were saying that it would be disrespectful. He should not be allowed.
How would that be disrespectful?
Well, a lot of the wrestlers and stuff were saying he's his own person.
100%.
If he wants to be a wrestler, he should be allowed to do so.
That's his choice.
Yeah, the sins of the father and all that stuff. Like,
Right.
what do you do?
I mean, if that's a part of their act, no.
Exactly.
Hell
right.
no.
But if you're a whole separate person, a whole separate persona and entity, then what? They just didn't want to be associated with it at all.
Yeah, but I mean, it also makes it look out like Chavo and him had problems, and that's why they're putting their 2 boys against each other.
You could see it
I could
that
see
way,
that, yeah.
but I see it more of like a legacy
I do too, yeah.
situation
Then put them together
to fight somebody.
to fight
Yes,
somebody
that's
else.
true, 'cause
team-
they were friends.
Team them up.
Yeah.
I
And
agree with
that's
that.
the legacy.
I agree with that. Okay, I'll give you that. And I do want to address some concerns with the reports that led some to believe that this was mishandled by the police.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Right. Well, it wasn't just the cops that have conflicting information either. The neighbor Holly also had some discrepancies, but they are between her verbal statement that she gave the police that they then typed up and her actual, in her own handwriting, written statement. Take from that what you will. Note that Holly runs a horse camp at her house too. In the original verbal report, she says on Thursday, Chris dropped Daniel off at the end of the driveway. But Friday morning, when he dropped him off at 8:30, Chris was driving recklessly and quickly up the driveway when he dropped Daniel off, and then he picked him up at noon. The report also says that when the bodies were found, she kenneled the dogs and called out to Daniel and Nancy. She went to Daniel's room upstairs and found him on his bed, face down, deceased. She started screaming and ran back out the same door she had entered, screaming, "Little Daniel has been murdered." In her written report given later, she said that Chris dropped Daniel off at the end of the driveway on Friday morning, not recklessly drove up it fast, and said that after she saw Daniel in his bed that day, she went to the bonus room where Nancy usually watches TV and found Nancy's body as well. So it's a big difference between finding a child and running out of the house screaming and finding a child and then continuing to look around the house. And why were the dogs out if the text said that they would be put in the enclosed pool area? And why let the neighbor lady go inside alone when you're there for a wellness check? Don't you have to make sure the area is safe first? I guess their main concern that day was a dog bite.
Oh my goodness. Reports from the scene said that Chris had dried blood on the bridge of his nose and in the nail bed of his right index finger. They did not take a sample of this blood on the scene. They decided to transport the body as is, and by the time it got to the lab, there was no blood on his nose or finger. Of course. They did note slight abrasions on both his legs, left foot, arm and hand, and right hand. But they did not note how fresh these were. So you can't tell by reports if these were from recent wrestling matches or possibly defensive wounds. There was a black-handled knife found under Daniel's bed. That is not in question. Pictures were taken of the knife on June 26th, showing where and in what condition it was found. But the question became when the police took the knife. The report from that day says it was unused, clean, and taken in for processing. Later reports show that police went back to the house on Tuesday, July 3rd, and collected the black-handled knife from under Daniel's bed. It was in the exact same position that it was photographed in 7 days prior.
So different information from one report to the next.
Every report was different.
Yeah.
How? When did they take the knife? Did they take it the day they found it, or did they take it a week later?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did he drop Daniel off Friday morning at the end of the driveway, or did he come screaming up the driveway like a banshee?
And was the knife even used?
No, a knife was not used.
That's what I'm saying.
But the fact that it's just discrepancies in the reports.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
of
Where's
course.
the knife even come in at?
Plus, to
It
me,
was just under his bed.
it's like a kitchen
Daniel's
knife.
bed.
Yeah, it's like a kitchen knife. And to me, personally, this is my opinion, it seemed like maybe he was scared of something and that's the only weapon he could keep with him to fend off somebody at night. Or
That's exactly what I thought too.
that's the first thing that came to my brain. So that might be indicative of if there was violence in the house or, he was scared of something. Yeah. So how do you know which one is right and which one is wrong? They also found that there was a search done on the computer for the name Elijah. Some think it was the prophet Elijah, since there were Bibles by Nancy and Daniel. Some wonder if it was Elijah Burke, which was the last person that Chris wrestled before the deaths. They also went and pulled Nancy's safe deposit box, and inside were pictures of her face with bruising on it. They said they believed that these were from when she was in a previous relationship, but how do they know that? Holly's sister and friend said that Nancy used to confide in them about issues at home. She said her and Chris had been fighting a lot lately about money, their life insurance, and their relationship. Nancy suspected Chris was cheating with one of the women of the WWE, and he used a burner phone to do it. And police did find a burner phone at the house, but I didn't see anywhere where it was processed to find out what it was actually used for. Many started conspiracy theories that Nancy's ex-husband, Kevin Sullivan, may have been involved. The deaths happened around the 10th anniversary of he and Nancy's divorce, which they believe was a trigger, and maybe he was the one at the door that Friday night. He used to go by the Prince of Darkness, and he says that these theories are outrageous and people bought too much into his character's satanic persona. Here's where I get hung up. On Sunday, June 25th at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Matthew Greenberg updated the Wikipedia page about Nancy's death. The bodies weren't found until 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that day. So how is it possible that he could post about her death some 14 hours before police even knew that there was a death, much less have time to make it public?
Pretty good, though.
What?
Like, how would he know that?
Oh, there's more. It wasn't just Wikipedia.
Oh.
Then on June 29th, WWE sent the police some online chat logs from the 24th, and at 8 p.m., username gob_the_illusionist posted, Benoit's wife died. The following comments were mostly blaming Chris immediately. This was the day before the bodies were found. So where were these random people getting their information? This is just added to the theory that this was all a cover-up.
Exactly. So if nobody knew that they were dead until Monday, how was he posting on Sunday?
Who's Gob?
Who is Gob?
Gob the illusionist.
Yeah. So
Gob the illusionist.
you got Matthew Greenberg and you got Gob the illusionist. Two people, which Matthew could have got his information from this chat.
True. Very true.
You know what I mean? If he saw his, since it was the day before, he could have posted that
And it
on
just said,
updated the Wikipedia page because they're all public.
right. And
But-
it just says online chat logs.
Yeah. So my question would be, who's Gob the illusionist?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because he came first. I'm about to say he's the chicken, but is he the egg?
Oh, no.
So either way, that was the main suspicious parts to me, that they came out and said this online before the bodies had been found. The main reason that people think that there was a cover-up.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Some people, they go as far as to say that he pissed Vince McMahon off and he took him out.
Ah,
Interesting.
But I don't know. They're all rumors and theories.
yeah.
We don't watch wrestling anymore, so I couldn't tell you how often they use that diving headbutt these days, but I do hope that they have something a little safer. Protect your brains, guys. You only get the one.
Yep. All right, well, that's it for this one. Catch us on the next one.
What?
Tell your friends.
Tell your friends. Tell your
your
doctors.
preachers,
Tell
tell
your
your wives.
Tell
preachers.
your preachers. Tell your doctors. Tell your
your sisters.
ex-wives. Tell your girlfriends. Tell them all.
Tell your
divorces.
current wife first.
Bring them. Tell your mistress. We need subscribers.
Y'all right, bye.
Bye.